Thank you very much, Nick. I'd like to invite Doran, Torbjörn, and Nick to sit at the table and participate in the panel discussion.
And maybe while they're coming up, just to remind people who are listening online that we're welcoming your questions through the chat if you want to send one in. So Koto, there are no questions online. I don't know if you have questions in the audience that you'd like to turn to.
We do.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Anna Naik. I'm from UT Health. My question comes as a working geriatrician, my typical patient, being like the pancreatic cancer patient you're showing. And a lot of the discussion from Dr. Gold's presentation and all three of yours now is thinking about, in terms of integrated diagnostics, really how do you work in the treatment? And it's not just simply the treatment, it's selecting a precision treatment, but it's a treatment outcome, a treatment goal. How do you work that in? And as you think about, let's take the case of an 80-year-old with multiple chronic conditions, you know, it's also the side effects of the treatment and how they relate to a treatment outcome. How do we bring in that degree of personalization or integration into the interface where you're getting the integrated diagnostics and you're bringing in all this personalized data about functioning that comes from the environment as well to frame an outcome goal?
I'll start from the end of the table. Doran?
Maybe I can start with it.
So I think you're precisely right, and that's what we're working on. So today, when we are treating a patient, we have a specific diagnosis, we have decision support, whether it's in-house, it's industry standard, or coming from a third party. That can all be surfaced to clinicians today. But to your point, the next step of that is analyzing outcomes, and also what the patient wants to do. Well, if I really don't want to have surgery, I really don't want to go through chemotherapy, what are the other options? And we can also say, well, let's look at the 2 million patients who before had a similar presentation. What did that pathway produce? And how can we help educate the patient and the provider at the time of therapy selection to make sure that the patient's goal is ready to be evaluated at that time of treatment? So I think you're exactly right. And bringing that outcome, real world and clinical evidence into that touch point between provider and patient is coming, and something that we're excited about.
Go ahead, Doran.
So I think you're exactly right. And, you know, in the old days, you had like one treatment for prostate cancer. Now you have 10. So you decide for one, but it might not work. You need to monitor it. So this is also one of the reasons your workload is increasing so much, because you're monitoring treatment. And you need to have kind of typical expected outcome for a therapy. You need to see if it works, and you need to do that continuously with therapy all the time. And then you have to change the treatment if it doesn't work to something else. And that will drive all of diagnostics much more than the incidence of cancer. So the answer is that you have to monitor a lot, as you have so many different things to do.
Thank you for that response.
And my view is you better don't have the disease. Because the unfortunate situation today is that there are guidelines, but it's almost impossible to relate this is the patient and this is the best treatment. And especially I'm coming back from New Zealand, Australia, right? And I hear again and again about patients waiting and waiting and waiting to get the treatment. Not only that, but also, right, so I would like to see the day when we say, this is my profile as a patient, and these are the probabilities. And then based on your profile, based on the treatment, I can also have some computer simulations that tells me this is what is the best for you, number 1, number 2, number 3, and now you can choose. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. So I would say that this is an integrated diagnostics that I would like to see sometimes in the future.
Looks like there's a question from the floor.
Can you hear me?
Just about. Could you speak into the mic, please? So those online can hear you too.
Okay. I'm Samantha Peterson from the Association for Molecular Pathology. This is a question specific to the CETRA presentation. You said that you are trying to move forward with reimbursement based on diagnosis and not on procedure. Are you able to elaborate on that as to why that may be a goal for your company in the future?
Yeah. Torbjörn, that question was for
So
you.
I'm Swedish. We're kind of close to the communists, right? So we have a governmental funding, and we see here you have a completely different system with reimbursement. As a foreigner, I see it. I spent a lot of time here, and that some of the things you could have achieved would have been achieved faster if you changed reimbursement. So it's an observation. It's not something we work on. Perhaps Epic has more power there, but it's an observation coming out from the outside into the U.S. that sometimes reimbursement should be a little modified in order to get things done faster.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that speaks to the issue of the alignment of the incentives to actually affect the way the behaviors of the practicing laboratory physicians or even radiologists becomes integrative. I think this is really where the biggest levers are that can be pushed. I think in the presentation by Nick, he talked about the providers, but there are many systems in which the providers themselves are constrained in how much they can do, because a lot of what we've talked about here hasn't included who's going to do the work and who's going to pay for it, which I think is the elephant in the room.
Hey, Travis Osterman, Vanderbilt. So I think all three companies are actively working to integrate and leverage artificial intelligence into their platforms. How do you balance the ends of the spectrum where on one side, on the data science side, you have the potential to create models that gain knowledge that maybe as a clinician I'm going to miss, with the clinical pushback of not wanting to change my decision-making based on a black box recommendation? How are you approaching that as you integrate that into your products?
I suspect that was for Nick.
I think actually all three, if you can answer briefly.
So I think whenever you're running a model, whenever that you are presenting that type of evidence through AI, machine learning, or an algorithm, making it very transparent and showing exactly what was happening, we think is very important. So if a model is run, it's not, go down this pathway because, the computer says so, but really helping to educate and putting that explainable AI in the hands of the provider, we think is key.
There is an entire research field on explainable AI. As an engineer, it's horribly frustrating. We have no clue. You have 170 billion unlinearities. You can combine them. They seem to work, which is ChatGPT. But the true answer is we don't really know. It works, but you have to have a human in the loop to catch when it doesn't. I don't believe in AI independent. You need humans in the loop, and that's you.
So I would say that there is a process of integrating more information that, say, AI can give. And I give a simple example, right? We have a system for lung nodule detection, right, for cancer screening, right, for CT. And actually that system gives much, much more in terms of the incidentals and a large aorta and various other pathologies that might be. Now, the reality is that the system is not prepared to get that information. And many times, as you have mentioned, right, it appears more, this is an additional load. But at the same time, there are instances where a patient is being cleared for lung nodules, but later on there's an event for that patient due to the enlarged aorta. So to me, there is obviously a process to integrate in the system to get the right reimbursements, to get the right recognition, to get the right workflow on what is the additional information that comes from such systems.
Thank you.
Roy Jensen.
Yes, Roy Jensen from the University of Kansas Cancer Center. So I have a comment, an observation, and a question. And my comment is, in my opinion, Sectra sounds a little bit too much like the next Bond villain. So you might want to rethink that. But that's just me. But my observation.
Would you mind elaborating a little bit?
No. I'll leave it as it is. So my observation is that this morning's presentations kind of reminded me of about 120 years ago when we were developing horseless carriages and flying machines. And we had incredible examples of individual institutions that are making great progress in that regard, but that process didn't really impact average citizens until a few decades when Henry Ford and Walter Chrysler and many others came along. So my question is, what is the key transition for this endeavor? And how do we get to the Henry Fords and the Walter Chryslers? Is integrated diagnostics just going to be a module in Epic, or what does that look like?
Well, that's a tough one. I think my personal thoughts are, if everyone is speaking the same language, things become easy to communicate. When you're working with vast amounts of data in non-structured radiology reports, well, maybe you have some BI-RAD scores, have pathologists who refuse to fill out synoptic templates. I think if you're not speaking that same language of interoperable data, all of the fun, exciting, and novel things that you can do with that data really go away. Well, some may say, oh, well, we use OCR and all these other tools. Well, that's great too, but it's still not going to get you to that same data with the same meaning if you don't have that structure. So I think it truly can be used for everyone once everyone starts speaking the same language.
I'm going to take the prerogative to wrap up because we have some folks virtually, and we'll park some of the questions and Trent.
Can I give a quote? So
Quick
I'll give a contra quote here. Henry Ford also said, if I asked people what they really wanted, they would have said faster horses. So sometimes we in industry need to be a little, because we need to be there when it hits you. That's what we do.
We'll have to.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion. Fantastic.